Hello, fellow risk taker, and welcome to my worst investment ever. Stories of loss to keep you winning. In our community, we know that to win in investing, you must take risk, but to win big, you've got to reduce it. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm on a mission to help 1 million people reduce risk in their lives. To join me, go to myworstinvestmentever.com and sign up for my weekly Become a Better Investor newsletter, where I share how to reduce risk and create, grow, and protect your wealth. Fellow risk takers, this is your worst podcast host, Andrew Stotz from A. Stotz Academy, and today I want to share some research I've been working on. The title of today's discussion is "The Man Behind the Most Successful Recession Indicator Questions It." Remember, this is for educational purposes only. This is not investment advice or recommendation. So I have a question for you, and I think it's actually one of the most pertinent questions that we can ask right now, and it's not an easy question to answer. Is the U.S. going into recession in 2023, or will the Fed orchestrate a soft landing? I want you to think about that as we go through today's presentation. I'm not going to fully answer that question in this presentation, but next week I'm going to do my best to try to give you the answer. But I want you to think about this. Before I start, I want to introduce you to Campbell Harvey, or Cam Harvey, and can see his picture in this presentation that I have. If you want to download the presentation, just go to the myworstinvestmentever.com and click on the download button. Cam was born in 1958, so a little bit older than me. He's a professor of finance at Duke University. He's a research associate of National Bureau of Economic Research. He served as president of American Finance Association in 2016, and he's been a visiting scholar at the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. He's a fellow of the American Finance Association. This man is very credentialed, and he wrote a thesis that he submitted in 1986 at the School of Business at the University of Chicago, I believe. The results show, and here's the summary of it. I'm showing the front page of that one. And it said, the University of Chicago. The main thing that came out of this was the following quote: "The results show that the yield spread had some ability to predict future consumption growth, both within sample and out of sample." Now, what does that mean? What he's talking about is the yield curve and the inverted yield curve predicting GDP. Before we continue, he also is a Joycean scholar, and that is James Joyce. I have a picture of him right there. And I invited Cam actually onto my podcast, and at least he did not refuse. He's a very big guy. But the reply he sent shows me that he is a teacher at heart. And I'm showing the book Ulysses by James Joyce. And Campbell Harvey, Cam, said, at the end of my question to him if he'd come on the show, he said, "P.S. I'm an amateur Joycean scholar. You need to fix your homepage." And then he presented me with the text out of Ulysses, where it is a dialogue going on between two different people. And one of the dialogues says that errors are the portals of discovery, basically. And this was not said by James Joyce. It was said by a character. So I did, in fact, fix my website. So now let's get into his inverted yield curve. His inverted yield curve has successfully predicted all U.S. recessions since 1968. The yield curve has now inverted for the 9th time. Now, I'm showing the yield curve of the 10-year U.S. Treasury bond minus the 3-month U.S. Treasury bond, which now is deep into inversion territory. And did the man who discovered the most successful recession indicator abandon it? That's the question. Here, Campbell Harvey wrote on his LinkedIn, he said, "My yield curve indicator has gone code red. It is 8 for 8 in forecasting recession since 1968 with no false alarms. I have reason to believe, however, that it is flashing a false signal." So Cam outlined why his yield curve inversion theory may no longer work. While it has had a perfect record of predicting recessions, he concludes that we may not get a recession in the U.S. In other words, that yield curve, the perfect forecasting variable, doesn't work. Now, he argues a couple of things that are interesting, and I've got a chart in here. Again, you can download this at myworstinvestmentever.com and go to the download button. He argues that the labor market is strong compared to the past two recessions. And I'm showing here the employment rate and also the nominal wage growth, which of course went up quite a bit during the COVID pandemic because of injection of funds, I believe. Now, unfilled jobs are still high, and skilled workers losing their jobs are getting new jobs faster. This is unlike 2008, when we had the global financial crisis, or the 2020 pandemic recession, where workers had no job opportunities to pursue. In fact, there are plenty of jobs available right now. Now, he also argued that consumers have less debt and are better prepared to withstand the rise in interest rates. And I'm showing a chart that shows the cumulative excess savings by U.S. households, which went from basically nothing up to about $2.5 trillion by its peak in third quarter of 2021, with most of this coming from government injection into businesses and into people's accounts. Now, the financial sector is strong compared to 2008. That's another argument that Cam makes. And I think this is a pretty reasonable argument. If you look at the amount of cash on the balance sheet of the banks, it's now at about $9 trillion. So it is incredible how much money that the cash that the banks have. And this is what we can see is that the bank balance sheets basically are about 10 to 15% cash and about 20% government bonds. So you can say 35 to 45% of the balance sheet of U.S. banks are basically risk-free assets, cash and government bonds. I do think that this is a very strong argument that the banks in America are in good shape. I don't believe that's the same thing with European and other banks, but that's something for another time. So reducing the risk of a financial sector crisis that would exacerbate an economic crisis. So yeah, it does make sense in that case. Now, Harvey continues that the reactions of economic agents could lead to lower growth. And if the economy survives the period, a soft landing is possible. Maybe the widespread knowledge of the success of this yield curve has caused people to adjust ahead of time, which will lessen the impact of the recession. Now, not everyone's buying Harvey's reasons for abandoning his measures. And here is one of the respectfully disagreeing, where they come in and talk about some of the arguments like Fed tightening and things like that. And so let's review some of these. One of the counter arguments and the reason why the inverted yield curve is working just fine, and we are going to have a recession hitting the U.S. mid-2023, according to Cam Harvey's inverted yield curve signaling. The labor force participation rate has been falling pretty dramatically. It has averaged about 63%, reaching an all-time high of 67% in 2000. But now it's down, down to its average or slightly below. The next counter argument is consumer debt is at all-time highs. Now, consumer debt service as a percent of disposable income is a chart that I'm showing, and it has risen a lot. I wouldn't say it's at all-time highs, but definitely it has risen. So most recently, consumer debt service payments as a percent of disposable income is definitely rising to be at a high over the last 13 years or so. The highest was in 2000 when we had the dot-com bubble. And so that is a possibility that consumer debt is massive. Also, credit card debt is getting ready to top $1 trillion. And that is another counter argument. Now, the next counter argument is that consumers need to borrow or tap into their savings. So though there is cumulative excess household savings, the personal savings rate has been falling now since the main injections into the economy from the COVID bailouts from the government to individuals. And that number has been falling. As disposable income gets eaten up, consumer savings rates are falling for sure. And consumer savings rate now is down below 5%. So it's very, very low. Consumers don't have a lot of room. Now, more arguments for why Harvey's inverted yield curve signal is working just fine. The consumer's weak as wages aren't keeping up with the fast rising consumer prices, and that's driven by high energy and commodity prices. And the Fed will not reduce its rate rise course soon as unemployment is still low. So let's review what we've learned in this brief review of Cam Harvey's post and the counter arguments. First, Cam Harvey is the man behind the most successful recession indicator in the US, and he's saying that it might have given a false signal in 2022. He points out that the US economy is strong, and the widespread knowledge of the success of the yield curve could have caused people to adjust ahead of time. Also, many still believe Harvey's recession indicator will be right for the 9th time since 1968, citing, for example, falling labor participation, higher consumer debt service, and wages not keeping up. So the question is, for you, will 2023 be the first time since 1968 that the inverted yield curve gives a false signal of recession? What do you think? This is the question of this discussion. And next week, I'm going to try to answer this question. I'll see you next week. As I wrap up, I want to say that, remember, I'm on a mission to help 1 million people reduce risk in their lives. And if you have not yet joined that mission, just go to myworstinvestmentever.com and join my weekly Become a Better Investor newsletter to reduce risk in your life. This is your worst podcast host, Andrew Stotz, saying, I'll see you on the upside.